thrilled to have on Howard Blum, New York Times best-selling author.
That sounds nice.
Are you used to that yet? Because you've written several books.
This is my 13th, so I've been doing this for a while, but it's always nice to hear.
We're going to talk about The Last Goodnight, which is about a spy. It's quite good. How did you start being a writer? You wrote for the New York Times. You're a contributor to Vanity Fair. But how, if we go all the way back?
All the way back.
Yeah.
I was a student in London at the London School of Economics, and I was young, about 17 actually, and I wanted to impress a girl at the University of Denver. So I wrote an article, sent it into the Village Voice. It got published. I couldn't believe it, and I then started writing more for The Voice while I was an undergraduate.
Wait, did you impress her?
I think it did, yes.
Did you marry her?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay,
marry her.
somebody else. All right, well, that's another show. So you start writing, and when did you start writing your first book?
I started writing my first book when I was at the Village Voice. I did a book about Nazi war criminals living in America, a book called Wanted, and I was 25 when it was published, and it caused congressional hearings. It was an international bestseller, and also involved a $100 million lawsuit against me and the New York Times that I'm now turning into a movie. Columbia.
Well, there you go.
Columbia Pictures bought the story, and I wrote the script working with Mark Gordon, a producer who spent a good deal of time with me working on the script. And I tell this story about this young man suddenly confronted with what for me was a good deal of success. At 25, your book becomes an international bestseller. I'm on the McNeil Lehrer show on PBS, and they catch me by surprise. One of the people I wrote about, a New Jersey purchasing agent, announced that he denied everything I said in the book. He denied everything my witnesses had said I'd made it all up, and he was suing me for $100 million. So the case goes on, and all my witnesses recant. They denied they ever said this to me. Finally, the Times settles. They pay this guy accused of being a murderer $450,000. I'm devastated and furious. Then 3 years later, I get a call from the attorney who was defending me, Floyd Abrams, a noted First Amendment lawyer. He did the Times case for the Pentagon Papers. He allowed that to get published. And he was one who represented me and engineered this settlement. And he said, Howard, they've just released the files on this guy. So I go up and read the files, and the files say that everything I've said is true. It's all there. And he admitted it to the CIA. He was a CIA employee, and they gave him lie detector tests. And he went through it bit by bit by bit, all the different incidents. And the movie is about how you feel first with success, and then failure, and then how you feel about having paid money to a man who was a murderer and settled with him.
You're 25 years old and all this is happening?
Yes, I was in way over my head.
What kind of stress is that?
Your whole career is stretching before you, and at one moment you see the sky's the limit, and the next you feel you're coming to a very dead end. It's very disturbing.
But you went on and continued to write a lot of
Yes,
books.
I moved from there to the New York Times, then eventually hired me, and I was at the Times for a decade as an investigative reporter.
Nominated twice for a Pulitzer Prize,
yes,
we should say.
The Times is a great place to be, a great training, and then I moved on to write books. I wanted to write just longer stories.
How do you sit and write a long story? For somebody hearing this, if they sit down and want to write a book, how do you start? You pick a topic.
I pick a topic. I try to get a topic where there are characters, where there are actions and suspense. And since my books are true stories, and most of the people are dead, if not all the people involved in the stories are dead, I have to find first-hand sources that will allow me to say what they were thinking, feeling, and doing at the time. And this means there has to be memoirs, diaries, letters, that I can go to these sources and I can recreate a true story, get in their minds. And in this case, in The Last Goodnight, I was able to go to archives and find the material I needed.
Let's talk about The Last Goodnight, about Betty Pack, a spy, codenamed Cynthia. It's going to be a movie, which you believe it's now going to be starring Jennifer Lawrence.
That's what was announced on Good Morning America, and I'm like to believe that's
You're
true.
pretty thrilled by that.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. What is it like being an author of these amazing books that you write and they become movies? Do you get any say in them, in the movie?
Not really. It depends who I'm dealing with. The producers on The Last Goodnight have involved me. The producers on the previous book, Dark Invasion, I had really nothing at all say in the scripts. Then the one before that, The Floor of Heaven, the writer would call me up 3 or 4 times a day. It seemed every time he put a comma in. So it depends who's involved in the process. But you start out doing these books. I live in a place in Fairfield County, Connecticut, and I'm on a hilltop, and I look out over a pond, and I have some acreage, and you're there really by yourself in all sorts of weather. The seasons change by there, and you're still typing away, putting these things out, and then suddenly, after 3 years or so, the book is done, it's printed, you can go on shows, talk to people like you, and then people want to make a movie of it. It's very gratifying. I mean, it's a long process. It's like training for a sport. You know, I was younger, I had all these ambitions. I would be a great basketball player, which fell apart very quickly. But you know, I would practice these different drills, and they came to nothing. But now I'm able to sit and write sentences, and there seem to be people interested in it, and that's very gratifying.
How do you keep track of your characters in a book? Because it's daunting. You write, you go back and read. Tell me the process of how you write.
Well, what I do is once I gather the information, and that takes a while, and you're never really done gathering, but when I think I have the gist of it, I then start making timelines, and I recreate as many interconnecting characters and scenes that occur on the different dates. Then I have these sometimes 50-page timelines, let's say, and then from those 50-page timelines, I then try to recreate a structure, an outline for the book, and it all has to be character driven. I have to divide it into different sections, how to tell it, where to begin. I have maybe a dozen beginnings every time, and some are written at great length, some are a couple of notes, until I find one that feels right. As for The Last Goodnight, it just sort of, it feels good, and then once you start that structure, then you can sort of sit back and, you know, buckle yourself into your seat and start typing every day. You know, go to your desk.
How do you type? Do you type on a computer?
On a laptop. I have an old laptop that I keep on getting repaired because it's my good luck laptop.
It just feels right, correct?
It's sort of antediluvian. It's a dinosaur completely, but I stay with it.
Do you ever worry that you're going to lose your manuscript? Because I've written 2 books and I back it up and back it up and back it up. Sometimes I print it out just so I have it in a drawer.
I back up, I print out, I send to a couple of friends to make sure they have it. I worry about that obsessively. When I leave the house, I hide the computer so no one can find it. If they were to break in, I don't know what they would steal, but I feel that they would take my laptop. So yes, I worry about this. My nightmare.
What does the written word mean to you?
It means how to communicate with people. It's a way of creating scenes, of recreating life, of beginning to tell a story. I like to think of myself as a storyteller, and I create stories with words.
The Last Goodnight. Tell me how you decided to write about this, the Mata Hari of Second World War. Let's talk about this character a little bit. Who was she?
Betty Pack was a glamorous American debutante who was born in Minnesota, really raised in Washington, who becomes a spy who does nothing less than change the course of the war. And you ask, how did I first become involved in Betty's story? Well, sort of tangentially. In the beginning, what I wanted to do was simply tell a woman's story. I'd written 13 previous books, and I'd never really centered around a woman's character. And I felt at this stage of my life, perhaps I was maybe able to handle a woman's story.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I paid my dues. I, watched 2 young girls grow up to be young women in their 20s. I had one ex-wife, and I said I paid my dues plus alimonies and tuition. I thought, that maybe if I didn't quite understand women, I could try to at least be able to delve into one in a nonfiction narrative. And when I decided to tell a woman's story, and since I like to have adventure and suspense in my stories, I thought, well, why not a spy? So I began reading about various female spies, and then I came across a little bit about Betty's story, and the information was sparse. But then I read about a few of her missions and her daring do exploits, and I thought, well, that's sort of cool, that's interesting. And then I read her obituary in Time magazine. They called her a blonde Bond, a woman who used the boudoir the way James Bond used the Beretta. And I said, that's pretty intriguing. I'm there. And then, though, as I said before, since these are true stories, I had to know what was going on in her head, how she was thinking, why she was such a failed person, a difficult mother, daughter, wife.
She worked for Britain and also the U.S.
U.S., why she was able to do this, and how she had made this journey from a glamorous debutante to become this perfect spy. And to that I needed her, what was going on in her mind. So I found out that her papers were at Cambridge University and Churchill College. So I went to Churchill College, not quite knowing what to expect, to the archives. And what the archivists brought out was a treasure trove. They brought out boxes and boxes of papers.
And are you giddy at this point?
Yes, it's like, you know, discovering gold. It's extremely exciting. Each day was another treasure. There was a memoir she had written, letters she had written, an address book, even a fairy tale book she had written when she was 12 years old that gave some insights into how she saw the world. And so I was able then not just to create a spy story, but also a psychological detective story, if you will, a story of how Betty had made this journey from a debutante to a spy.
I hope this movie is as good as the book, because the book is really good.
Thank you.
It's really
Thank
good.
you.
What are you working on now, Howard?
I'm doing another nonfiction story, a Cold War story about the search for the atomic spies. And my two main characters are a FBI agent, a sort of tough FBI agent, sort of a playboy type, who becomes best buddies with a rather nerdy cryptographer at a facility called Arlington Hall, which is just across the Potomac in Washington, D.C., where we're deconstructing these Russian ciphers. And suddenly they're reading these ciphers and they realize, oh my gosh, the entire Los Alamos program has been infiltrated. So they then have to go on a hunt, these two unlikely friends working together to help track down the spies.
How many more books are in you?
Yeah, I hope a lot. I hope I can keep on. I hope the publishers will want them, and I hope people will want to read them. I'd like to be doing this forever. The idea of ever retiring is an anathema.
Yeah, don't ever do that.
This gives me pleasure. It's hard and it's work. You know, there's something that comes from hard work that you feel if you can actually accomplish it, get it done. That's a very gratifying feeling, and I'd like to be able to do that for a long time.
When you finish a book, what is the feeling?
It's, well, first, day one is elation, and day two is, oh my gosh, there's so much more I could have done, so much more I should have done. Maybe I should have done one more trip to one more person I should have spoken to. Maybe I should have just dug a little deeper. You know, there's this saying in French, a work of art is never finished, it's only abandoned. And you reach a certain stage and say, okay, it's time to move on to the next book. And that's usually that time is when tuition bills are due.
And you have 3 children, right?
Yes, I do.
All going to Ivy League schools.
Yeah.
One's out, you said 2 are still in.
Yeah.
If you had to give some advice to a writer, what would you tell him that wants to write books, novels?
Well, my youngest, I think, is going to be a writer. She has real talent. She's been published places. She's a sophomore in college. Actually, in September, she'll be a junior. And what I tell her is, first thing is tenacity. Don't give up. You got to learn to deal with rejection. A lot of people are just going to reject you for whatever reasons. It might have anything to do with your work. You have to believe in yourself. And at the same time, you have to listen to what people are saying, why they're rejecting it, what you can learn. And then the second thing I try to tell them is what Napoleon told his generals: be lucky. I just hope my kids are lucky.
Have you ever had a book rejected that you're going to put out now that you're this huge success?
When I was 22, I went off to Paris and I wrote a book, a novel, and it was a very indulgent young man's story, and it never got published, thank God. And it's in the bottom of a drawer somewhere.
Why do you say thank God?
Well, it's just a young man's book. My next book was Wanted, which was a big success. That was 3 years later. But in Paris, I sort of learned how to write. I learned how to push distractions aside and to go to my desk and to sit down every day and complete the book. And the first book I completed was a success because I completed it, because I got it done. I started on page 1 and finished whatever 400 pages later and was able to tell my story despite all its flaws.
What was it about Paris that allowed you to write?
Well, you know, went off to play tennis with Hemingway and box with Gertrude Stein. No.
I'm picturing this, but I'm like, no, the dates don't work. Anyway,
It was
so
just,
it's
it was a young
so...
man. It was romantic. I was literally, I'd been out of Stanford. I was working at the Village Voice. I met a woman at a party down at the Bowery before the Bowery was chic. We were talking, and we said, wouldn't it be cool to just go off in Paris and write for a year? And within the month, we were there.
Wow. Looking back on what you've done so far, is this what you thought your life would be, that you're a best-selling novel, that you have motion pictures with major stars out of your books?
I thought I'd be playing for the New York Knicks. I mean, if I look back.
Did you really?
No, but I thought, I didn't know what to expect. I wanted to find something that I thought I was good at, and that I was proud of doing. I think that was the two things I was looking for. And by being a writer, it was a sense of accomplishment when things started appearing in print when I was young, and people wanted more, so I felt that I was good at it. And I still have that, you know, pride, like seeing the book here. It fills you with pride, and I still have this tremendous challenge beginning a new book. It's a whole new mountain to climb, which is exhilarating and daunting at the same time. And I've sort of measured out my life with these moments of exhilaration and also being daunted.
Well, you've made it, and it's quite lucrative for you. Thank heavens. That's awesome, because as you say, you have college tuitions to pay for. But it must just be, when you see your book on the silver screen, what does that feel like? I can't imagine.
It's very gratifying. I mean, in this book, The Last Goodnight, I'm waiting to still see it on the silver screen. Let's hope. But I did get to see the New York Times bestseller list, and to see it, you know, listed there. It's very good.
When that happens, does somebody call you and say, hey, you're on the list, or do you open up something, or does your publisher call you? What happens?
Well, the publisher called, but because, as I said, this is my 13th book, you know, I had Googled the night before, and I was already found it, and I was already quite happy. You know, the first, you know, you go back to the early days, you'd have to wait till Sunday to pick up the paper, and then you get to the papers sometimes Saturday night. There's the scene in this movie I'm writing where the young man wants to find out about his first book, and he gets to the book, actually the newspaper stand on Sheridan Square in downtown Manhattan in Greenwich Village, and he gets there after midnight on Saturday night when the Times trucks are just dropping off the Sunday paper, and so he can read the review of his book. And now, of course, you can get it right online on your phone.
I know, things have changed. Howard Blum, thanks so much for coming on. You're a joy to speak with, and thank heavens you're right, because they're really good books.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
When one missing, who's this girl? Spend all night kissing, and the ball was right here. Then who else is missing? Got a little sidetracked to find myself wishing I could find the keys to the door, but it's also a metaphor. Need to keep locked in the grocery store, but mine just to save time. Skip right ahead to the last ride. The harder we look, the less we can see. Don't you know, you know that you need me.